The reason people don't respect you isn't because you're too kind. It's because you've taught them that disrespecting you comes with zero consequences. Let me tell you something you already know, but pretend you don't. You're exhausted because you've been running a charity for people who never asked to be saved. You smile through meetings where your ideas get stolen. You say, "No problem," when someone cancels on you for the third time. You explain yourself to people who've already decided you're wrong. And then, late at night, you lie there wondering why nobody seems to take you seriously, why you feel invisible in rooms full of people who claim to care about you. Here's the uncomfortable part. They don't respect you because you've given them no reason to. Not because you're weak, but because you've been operating under a beautiful, poisonous delusion that if you're just understanding enough, patient enough, selfless enough, people will eventually recognize your worth and treat you accordingly. They won't. They'll just take more. I know this because I spent years being that person. The one who thought boundaries were mean. The one who believed that real strength meant absorbing everyone else's chaos with a smile. The one who confused being used with being valued. And I can tell you exactly when things changed. The moment I stopped waiting for people to suddenly develop the decency I'd been performing for them, and started understanding the rules they'd been playing by all along. Stay with me for the next 20 minutes, and I'll show you the brutal mechanics of respect, the invisible currency of power, and why the nicest thing you can do for yourself, and paradoxically, for others, is to stop being so pathologically accommodating. This isn't about becoming an asshole. It's about understanding that the world operates on principles you were never taught, and that ignorance isn't protecting your goodness. It's just making you an easier target. Here's the fairy tale we're all sold. Respect is something you earn through consistent kindness, moral integrity, and genuine care for others. Be a good person, the story goes, and good things will come to you. People will see your heart. They'll appreciate your sacrifices. They'll naturally reciprocate your energy. It's a beautiful idea. It's also catastrophically wrong. What actually happens is this. You become the person everyone calls when they need something. The reliable one. The understanding one. The one who never complains, never demands, never makes things difficult. And precisely because you're so accommodating, you become the lowest priority in every room. Not because people are evil, most aren't, but because you've signaled, through every "it's fine" and every "don't worry about it," that your needs are negotiable while everyone else's are fixed. Think about your workplace. The person who gets promoted isn't necessarily the most competent. It's the one who's made it clear, through strategic visibility and carefully managed relationships, that undervaluing them would be expensive. They don't work harder than you. They've just made ignoring them feel risky. Meanwhile, you're staying late, covering for colleagues, accepting vague promises about next time, and wondering why your dedication looks like weakness in performance reviews. Or look at your relationships. The friend who only texts when they need something. The family member whose crisis always takes precedence over your plans. The romantic partner who knows you'll always be there, so they've stopped trying. You think you're being loving. They've learned you're predictable, and predictable means safe to disappoint. Here's the reversal that stings. It's not that the world is cruel and people are selfish. It's that you've been performing a version of kindness that asks nothing in return, and then you're surprised when that's exactly what you get. Nothing. You're not a victim of other people's manipulation. You're the architect of your own irrelevance, building your identity around being the person who demands least and gives most. And the cruel joke is that we call this virtue. The truth is simpler and uglier. Respect isn't about your moral character. It's about perceived cost. People treat you well when treating you badly feels expensive, socially, emotionally, practically. When you remove all cost, when you make yourself endlessly available and infinitely forgiving, you're not demonstrating strength. You're announcing that you can be taken for granted without consequence. And once people learn that lesson, they'll keep taking. Not because they hate you, but because humans are efficiency machines, and you've made exploiting your goodness the path of least resistance. I remember the exact moment I understood this. I was at a friend's birthday dinner. Someone I'd known for years, someone I'd helped move apartments, someone I'd listened to through countless breakups and career anxieties. I arrived on time because that's what I did. I brought a gift because that felt right. And when I got there, I realized I was seated at the far end of the table, next to people I'd never met, while the birthday person was surrounded by acquaintances they barely knew, but who had more social currency. Louder, flashier, less reliable, but more entertaining. I sat there, making small talk, watching this person I'd invested years into barely acknowledge my presence, and I felt something shift. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. A sudden, sharp understanding that all my consistency, all my thoughtfulness, all my showing up, it had made me background noise. The reliable friend. The one you didn't have to impress because they'd always be there anyway. The whole dinner, I was polite. I smiled. I did what I always did. But something had broken, and I knew I couldn't keep playing this role. So I stopped. Not dramatically. I didn't make a scene or announce anything. I just quietly recalibrated. When this friend would text asking for advice, I'd reply, but not immediately, and not with the essays I used to write. When they'd suggest plans, I'd sometimes say yes, but often I'd say I was busy, and I was, because I started prioritizing literally anything else. When they'd share their latest crisis, I'd listen, but I stopped offering solutions, stopped carrying their emotional weight like it was my responsibility. And here's what happened. Nothing, for a while. They barely noticed. Then, slowly, I saw something I didn't expect. They started reaching out more intentionally, asking if I was okay, suggesting we do things I actually wanted to do. The dynamic shifted because I'd changed the terms. By becoming slightly less available, slightly less accommodating, I'd accidentally made myself more valuable in their mental calculus. I hadn't become mean. I hadn't punished them. I'd just stopped teaching them that my presence was a given. And the moment they realized it might not be, the effort increased. Not because they were suddenly better people, but because I'd finally introduced consequences, the possibility of absence, into a relationship that had run on my guaranteed proximity. Let's talk about Florence in the early 1500s. Imagine a city that's basically one giant high-stakes corporate environment, except instead of performance reviews, you get exiled or assassinated. Families jockeying for power, alliances shifting overnight, everyone smiling at dinner while calculating who to betray at breakfast. Into this beautiful, vicious mess walks Niccolo Machiavelli. Now, Machiavelli gets a bad reputation. His name literally became synonymous with manipulation. But here's what he actually did. He watched how power really worked, not how philosophers said it should work, and he wrote it down. He looked at leaders who succeeded and leaders who failed, and he noticed something uncomfortable. The ones who succeeded weren't necessarily the most virtuous. They were the ones who understood that being loved was lovely, but being feared was reliable. That generosity without strategy just made you poor. That trusting people's better nature was a great way to end up dead in a ditch while your more cynical rival took your position. Think of it as a Renaissance version of your office politics, but with better architecture and more poison. Machiavelli saw endless examples of good people who lost power because they assumed others operated with the same moral framework they did. Meanwhile, the ruthless thrived because they understood the actual rules of the game, not the rules everyone pretended to follow during speeches about honor and loyalty. Here's why this matters. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for cruelty. He was describing reality. He watched genuinely competent leaders get destroyed because they were too decent, too trusting, too invested in being liked. And he watched calculating operators succeed, not because they were smarter or better, but because they understood a simple truth. In any system involving human beings and scarce resources, power flows to those who understand its mechanics, not to those who wish the mechanics were different. The uncomfortable part, the part that makes modern readers squeamish, is that he was often right. Not about everything, and not in ways we should always emulate, but about the fundamental observation that shaped his entire philosophy. People respond more predictably to their interests and fears than to their ideals. That generosity creates gratitude only when it's strategic, not when it's automatic. That respect isn't earned through virtue alone, but through the perception that disrespecting you carries risk. 500 years later, you're living in the same game. Different costumes, same dynamics. And you're still trying to win by being the kindest person in the room, wondering why the rules feel rigged. So here's the manual nobody gave you, translated from Renaissance politics into your actual life. Rule 1. Your value to others is determined by your scarcity, not your service. The more available you make yourself, the less valuable you become. This isn't cynical, it's economics. When something is abundant and free, people treat it casually. When it's limited and comes with conditions, they treat it carefully. You're not being appreciated less because you're too giving. You're being undervalued because you've removed all friction from taking. Rule 2. Consequences create respect faster than character does. People will test boundaries until they hit something solid. If you respond to being walked over with more patience, more understanding, more "it's okay," you're not being admirable. You're training them that walking over you is safe. Respect appears the moment people realize that mistreating you actually cost them something. Your time, your goodness, your presence, your cooperation. Rule 3. Predictability without leverage is weakness. Being reliable is only valuable if the other party needs your reliability. If you're always there, always saying yes, always picking up the pieces, you're not dependable. You're guaranteed. And guaranteed things don't command premium treatment. They get background status, deferred maintenance, last-minute cancellations. You become emotional infrastructure, invisible until you break. Rule 4. People treat you how you teach them to treat you. This is the one that stings most. Every time you accept disrespect with grace, every time you swallow your frustration to keep the peace, every time you accommodate someone who wouldn't accommodate you, you're running a training program. You're teaching them that this is acceptable, that you'll absorb it, that there's no penalty for treating you as optional. And they learn fast. Rule 5. Strategy looks like coldness to people who expected unlimited access. When you start setting boundaries, when you become selective about your availability, when you stop explaining yourself to people who've proven they won't listen, some people will call you different, changed, harsh. What they mean is, you're no longer operating on terms that benefit them at your expense. That's not you becoming worse. That's them adjusting to the fact that you've stopped subsidizing their convenience with your dignity. These aren't rules for becoming manipulative. They're observations about how human systems actually function underneath the polite fictions. Ignoring them doesn't make you good. It makes you confused about why the outcomes keep surprising you. Let's get specific. What does this actually look like when you stop being everyone's emotional vending machine and start operating like someone whose time and energy have actual value? First, you stop explaining yourself into irrelevance. When you say no, you don't follow it with a paragraph justifying your decision, pre-apologizing for existing, offering 3 alternative solutions. You just say no. I can't do that. That doesn't work for me. I'm not available. Full stop. The urge to over-explain comes from a belief that you owe everyone access to your reasoning, that you need permission to have boundaries. You don't. People who respect you will accept your no. People who don't will push, and pushing is exactly how you identify who shouldn't be getting unlimited access to you anyway. Second, you let uncomfortable conversations stay uncomfortable. Someone shows up late to your meeting again? Don't smile through it. Let the silence land. This is the 3rd time. What's going on? Someone takes credit for your work? Don't swallow it to avoid conflict. Actually, I developed that. Let's make sure attribution is clear going forward. The magic isn't in being aggressive. It's in refusing to do the emotional labor of making their bad behavior comfortable for them. Tension is information. When you smooth it over instantly, you're protecting them from the natural consequences of their actions. Third, you create explicit criteria for who gets what level of access to you. Not everyone deserves your best energy, your instant availability, your patient explanations. You have different tiers of relationships, whether you acknowledge it or not. The people who show up for you get different access than people who only remember you exist when they need something. This isn't about being transactional or mean. It's about being honest. Your friend who canceled on you 3 times but wants you to rearrange your schedule for their thing. I can't prioritize that right now. You're not explaining why. You're not being apologetic. You're just stating reality based on how they've demonstrated you rank in their priorities. Fourth, and this is crucial, you make absence a possibility. The reason people take you for granted is because leaving isn't on the table. They know you'll be there. You'll forgive. You'll understand. You'll make it work. So make leaving real. Not as a threat, not as manipulation, but as a genuine option you're willing to exercise. That friendship that drains you, you can let it fade. That family expectation that feels like obligation, you can decline it. That job that exploits your loyalty, you can explore other options. When people sense that your presence is conditional, not on perfection, but on basic reciprocity and respect, the effort level changes dramatically. Finally, you stop trying to be liked by everyone and start being impossible to ignore by the people who matter. Niceness without boundaries makes you forgettable. Clarity about your standards, even when it makes some people uncomfortable, makes you respected. The person who speaks up in meetings gets heard more than the one who always agrees. The friend who says, "Actually, that hurt," maintains deeper relationships than the one who pretends everything's fine. The family member who sets clear limits about what they will and won't do gets less dumped on than the one who absorbs everything with a smile. This isn't about becoming calculating or cold. It's about understanding that kindness without self-preservation is just slow-motion self-destruction. The most sustainable version of being good to others starts with being unwilling to betray yourself for their comfort. Here's the truth that nobody wants to say out loud. Most people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you're worried about disappointing them. They're running their own calculations, managing their own anxieties, trying to get their needs met with minimum effort. When you make yourself the easiest option, the one who costs nothing and demands nothing, you're not building connection. You're becoming furniture. Useful, reliable, invisible furniture. And the darkest part, some people will get angry when you change. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've stopped doing something convenient. They'll call it selfishness. They'll say you've changed for the worse. They'll miss the version of you that absorbed their chaos without complaint. Let them miss it. That version of you was dying quietly while calling it virtue. But here's the reframe, the sliver of light in all this darkness. Understanding how power actually works doesn't corrupt you. It liberates you. When you stop believing that the world rewards pure-hearted martyrdom and start recognizing the actual mechanics of respect, you can finally operate with both kindness and effectiveness. You can be generous without being a doormat. You can be compassionate without being exploitable. You can care deeply about people while refusing to participate in dynamics that diminish you. The goal isn't to become someone who uses people. It's to stop being someone who's useful precisely because they're easy to use. It's to build a version of yourself that can be genuinely good. Not because you're afraid of being anything else, but because you've chosen it from a position of strength, not from a position of fear. Think of it this way. You're standing at the border between 2 countries. Behind you is the land of beautiful illusions, where virtue is always rewarded and goodness is always recognized, where if you just try hard enough, people will finally see your worth. It's a comfortable place to believe in. It's also why you're exhausted and invisible. Ahead of you is something harder and more real. A place where you understand that respect is earned not through moral purity, but through strategic presence. Where you're kind because you choose to be, not because you're terrified of being disliked. Where you can look at power dynamics without flinching and navigate them without losing yourself. The uncomfortable truth is this. The version of you that everyone can use is not the best version of you. It's just the most convenient version for everyone who isn't you. So here's your question, the one that'll keep you up tonight. Are you building a life where your goodness comes from strength and choice, Or are you performing endless selflessness because you're afraid that setting a single boundary will prove you're not actually worthy of love? Are you the author of your own terms, or just the accommodating character in everyone else's story, wondering why you keep getting written out of the important scenes? You don't have to become what you hate, but you do have to stop being what everyone expects you to be simply because you're afraid of who you'd be if you finally, honestly said, no, not anymore. Not like this. The world doesn't need more people pretending to be okay with dynamics that are destroying them. It needs people who understand how things actually work and choose to be good anyway. Not from naivety, but from clear-eyed, unshakable self-possession. Now the question is, which person are you ready to become?